For about 40 years, Saudi Arabia has been sending prospective doctors to Canada for their medical training, and the kingdom pays handsomely to do so. But now it is telling all its current Saudi students here to pack up and leave. And that means roughly 1,000 medical residents and fellows are suddenly being ripped from the Canadian healthcare system. Katie Nicholson sizes up the impact.
Patients line the hallways of Hamilton General, clearly a hospital already under pressure. Conditions may soon worsen.
Ultimately, it will put a significant strain on a system that is already significantly strained.
Hamilton Health Sciences is poised to lose 15% of medical residents. The doctors in training can be the first specialists patients encounter. All casualties of Saudi Arabia's campaign against Canada, all ordered out of the country and out of this hospital.
It's a kind of a black swan event for us. We certainly didn't anticipate this happening at the start of this year, so this is not in our budget.
Right now, Saudi Arabia covers much of the cost for its doctors who train in Canada. Now, hospitals will have to find money to bring in physician's assistants and nurse practitioners to deal with this urgent problem.
It's an unexpected blow throughout the country. There's no question.
Kerry Bowman has taught Saudi medical students in Toronto for years.
We benefit, and so does Saudi Arabia. So to a large extent, it has worked very, very well. So they're picking up greatly needed skills and bringing those skills back to the Middle East with them. We are receiving very high caliber doctors who are working frontline with our patients at no cost to Canada.
But now, Canada will have to pay a price, beginning with the doctors left behind.
We'll have to pull more on-call duties on nights and weekends. They'll have to look after more patients in the floor. They'll have to have more help in the operating room to cover the volumes.
Not that the Saudi doctors have it any easier. Their lives pulled out from under them.
What we're already seeing is a certain degree of panic as these young people are trying to organize their lives and their families. Some of them have only just arrived in Canada, just signed a lease for an apartment. Maybe they bought a car and got their kids organized in school.
So where will Canadian patients feel it when they walk into a hospital? In the short term, doctors say there may be longer wait lists for emergency care or to see a specialist, but they say the system will recover. Katie Nicholson, CBC News, Toronto.
It's been 4 days now since Saudi Arabia started this diplomatic war against Canada for criticizing the country's human rights record over Twitter. While Arab states have rushed to defend the Middle Eastern kingdom, Canada is standing alone. Katie Simpson explains why our closest allies are largely staying mum.
When Canada hosted the G7 summit, the Prime Minister stood alongside his closest international partners. But as Canada wades through a messy diplomatic dispute with Saudi Arabia, he's getting little public support from those same trusted allies.
We have seen a weakening of the sort of solidarity that I think would have been taken for granted a few years ago. And that is a very, very worrying thing.
This former British High Commissioner to Canada is disappointed the UK and the US are staying neutral in the spat. The British Foreign Office offered a brief statement saying Canada and Saudi Arabia are both close partners of the UK and we urge restraint. And earlier this week, the line from the US, Canada is on its own.
Both sides need to diplomatically resolve this together. We can't do it for them. They need to resolve it together.
In the wake of Brexit in the UK and the rise of Donald Trump in the US, traditional superpowers are stepping back from their international responsibilities. Anthony Carey says the lack of solidarity is a result of that shift.
And I hope that this is just some rough weather that we're going through and that we can restore the strength of those relationships. Because it's a very worrying thing if we simply get into a world where it's every nation for itself.
Canada would not be testing the strength of its allies, some argue, if it stuck to traditional diplomatic channels rather than use Twitter.
The thing with Canada, their approach was undiplomatic. Behind closed doors, dialogue, communication, that's diplomacy.
Tensions with the Crown Prince, who has spent money and time trying to improve his international image, are not easing just yet. But there are hints the worst may have passed. It was confirmed today oil exports from Saudi Arabia to Canada will not stop because of the dispute. And the freshly recalled Saudi ambassador to Canada said Justin Trudeau's comments yesterday were positive, though he was clear to say Canada needs to do more to restore the relationship. With the rise of nationalism in the UK and the US, diplomats say Canada may need to become comfortable with standing alone on the world stage, because that is exactly where it's likely to stay for the time being. Katie Simpson, CBC News, London.
So the world may not be taking sides, but that shouldn't be interpreted as anyone downplaying Saudi Arabia's importance. The Prime Minister even admitted yesterday it's in Canada's best interest to smooth things over here, but there isn't much of a bilateral relationship between our two countries. So just how important is Saudi Arabia to Canada? Take trade. Saudi Arabia is ranked as Canada's 19th biggest trading partner at $4 billion. As global trading goes, though, that's a small number. And while there have been threats of retaliation, like an unspecified freeze on Saudi investment, so far it hasn't amounted to much.
We have not seen significant changes in our markets, so whatever may or may not be happening is clearly not a big impact on our markets.
The kingdom says for now it won't stop oil exports to Canada, but even if tensions escalated, and it did, it only accounts for about 10% of total imports and could easily be replaced by domestic oil. So what's really at stake may come down to this.
And it is not in Canada's interest to weaken the Saudi regime, and because that would mean giving Iran, which already has an upper hand, giving them even more space to maneuver and manipulate. There's a critical imbalance of power in the Middle East.
The high-stakes politics and stability of the region are what really matter for Canada and indeed the world.
It's basically, we cannot ignore Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia cannot ignore us. We cannot have a hostile relationship.
So there's a fine line between criticizing the state for human rights abuses and breaking the relationship beyond repair. An update now on a man we told you about last night who is facing deportation to Saudi Arabia. He's been granted a reprieve. The man is free from detention after an immigration hearing today in Montreal. CBC first reported yesterday that the United Nations had asked Canada to not deport him until its review of his case is complete. The man, who we are only identifying as Omar to protect him and his family, says he will be killed if he is sent back to Saudi Arabia.